listing of all of our transportation electrification programs on the new website. And I think it looks great. I'd love for y'all to check it out. Let us know if you find anything that's not working, and let other people know about it if you have the opportunity. We are still pushing out our grant-funded, partially grant-funded EV incentive and e-bike incentive. Those programs have been going pretty strong. I am not getting really regular registration data from the state, so it's a little bit hard to tell what's happening across the community, but I think there are a lot of people buying EVs, and I think it would be great to make sure people know about these programs. So if you likewise want to help spread the word about them, I always appreciate that. There's a couple of us chatting about strategies for electric planning. I think we'll maybe touch on that a little later. Essentially, we're holding off on that a little bit until after the budget. My update to council that I do every year has been pushed back to May 4. So I'm working on that. Well, shoot, I was hoping to work on that this week, but I'll be working on that all next week. And yeah, welcome any questions that you all may have about that, probably offline. Also, I found a little nice attachment with Oregon Building Code information. As some of you know, I've been collaborating with a group of cities over the last couple of years to help advocate for more progressive energy codes at the state level. And this link to an info sheet that the Zero Coalition put together, I think, is really helpful in explaining some of the opportunities and barriers around that. So I encourage you to check that out. I think I'm just going to stop there because I did write this all down, so I don't need to say word for word what's on here. There's a couple of different things on the horizon that I'm excited to work on as capacity allows. And I'll leave it there unless Bridget wants to jump in with any updates.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that a reminder that on the 22nd, we're having a water event, and on the 29th, we're having a responsible consumption event. So just a reminder.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Stu. That was a great report. And I do appreciate getting, just the blurb and the links that, on the report ahead of time. I do have just a couple of questions. One is on the website looks terrific. You guys have done a terrific job. When I linked to the energy efficiency, the zero interest loans are still the old rules. So I'm just wondering what the rollout is for the new rules, the higher limit and the different kinds of things that are eligible for that. And then the other question I had is about the utility solar at the airport, which is very exciting news. I'm wondering what the city might be thinking about in terms of rates for that, whether that would be offered to ratepayers at a slight premium, as is the case with other renewable energy options, or if it's just going to be just like any other electron coming in from any other source.
Yeah, I can speak to that briefly. So as far as the energy retrofit program, that's just a matter of me getting with staff and setting up the program. Things are a little tight right now, but it's on the list, and I'm excited to get to that. There's a few other things that have cropped up around that I need to investigate, and hopefully we're good to go. More to come on that.
If there's anything I can do to help you on that, let me know.
Very good.
Just need another pair of hands.
Okay. And then as far as the utility solar, I don't think the exact scope of that project is determined yet. I'm advocating for additional community solar projects, which would come in underneath that. It would be a different class of project. But as far as having utility solar, I personally envision that just feeding into the whole grid mix and sort of washing out across all ratepayers. There's different ways to do it. So I think that remains to be seen. Okay.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions? You can always email me or Tanya if you have one.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, with the events that are coming up, where would we find the descriptions of those so that we can share them? will there be news announcements on the city website or?
Yeah, they're on the city calendar, and they were also in the city source. And there's another web page on the all the climate pages that has an events page that you could direct people to as well with the same sign up information.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Sure. So are there any other, oh, Ray?
Yes, Stu, a question for you on your report for council on May 4th. That'll be available a little before the meeting for a preview, or if we have any questions for you, or?
You know, ideally, in my ideal world, everything would be done months ahead of time with a great consensus. But I think what this is going to be is a staff report on how we're going towards our goals. It'll be very similar to last year's, I think. So it's not going to be a dressy coffee table sort of update product. If
that's fine. And I'm thinking of maybe days before.
Yeah, potentially. I guess what I would say is if folks want to engage with me on that, to email me directly and we can talk, because it's, to be completely honest, I'm not trying to incorporate a lot of suggestions at this point. I'm just trying to deliver the information as prescribed. But I do want to know what everyone's thinking, and I do want to make sure that we put the information out there that's needed to answer whatever important questions are floating around. So yeah, I guess let's talk about it after the meeting sometime, Ray, and we can.
Okay. Because I mean, following that, I think in July we have the commission report to the council.
Yeah, I don't want to give away the ending, but this report is going to be very similar to the last three in terms of how we're doing, which is to say that there's a lot going on, and we have huge goals that we're not making.
Well, okay.
So optimistic.
I hope I didn't spoil the ending.
No, I think we are making some progress out, even though it's slow. And,
yeah.
Okay.
And there's a ton of opportunities. So I don't want to distract from that.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Stu.
Okay. Yeah.
Any other items from commissioners? There's two. I have one, and then Commissioner Barth has one as well that I was going to relay. Go ahead, Gary.
So I followed back up on the carbon note. That was an item that the commission discussed several months back with Adam Hanks, and he informed me that the city is in the process of updating its new council action item software, and the carbon note he expects to be incorporated into that new uniform communication system that all staff will be using to advance items to the council. A part of that integration may also include his seeking our input on the format, content, what have you. So that's something to look forward to.
Excellent. Any other items from commissioners? So I have two. The first one is my own item, which is that it would be wonderful if some other commissioner might be able to step forward to be the co-chair of this commission, because I do not feel like I am doing justice to the position, and I'm a little bit concerned that if something really needed to be done, that I might not be available to do it. So I'm happy to continue, with the position for the time being. But if there's anybody else that would feels that they would like to be the co-chair, then please let me know, and I'm happy to resign at that point. The second thing is from Commissioner Barth. He just wanted to, I guess, make the rest of the commissioners aware, or the group aware, that he has been communicating with local groups, including, for example, SOCAN and the climate, the CCOC, and Stu and Tanya, I guess, are a part of that process as well. Mostly, I think he was just trying to bring to everybody's attention that he continues to communicate with people outside of this formal sort of setting, with the idea that you know, it's a way of advancing the goals of both the CCOC as well as the CPC, and it isn't meant to be some sort of a secret. It's just a different venue, I suppose. And then, as far as I'm aware, we don't have any reports from representatives of other commissions, unless somebody has other information on that. No. So next, we have public testimony from, and I might mangle this name, Sidoriak, and as well as Cooper. And I don't believe they will be presenting live and in person.
Actually, Charisse will be, and she's waiting. Whenever you're ready, I can bring her on.
Oh, please bring her on. Hello.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak to you. I asked for 10 minutes and I am going to talk quick, so I'll be over in 10 minutes. I need to show you a PowerPoint. Since I'm not familiar with everybody's background, I'm going to assume that this idea of climate smart conservation, or the term as it's used nowadays, is unfamiliar in this area. I apologize if that's an insult to anybody. I moved to Ashland a little over 4 years ago after 35 years in the National Park Service and the Bureau of Land Management. In April 2019, I co-founded the Southwestern Oregon Climate Smart Working Group. And last year during COVID, I reviewed 2 City of Ashland plans ripe for updating: the 2017 Climate and Energy Action Plan, or CEAP, and the 2016 Ashland Forest Plan. I reviewed these plans through a climate smart lens, which I will define. My findings have been provided to the Commission when I requested to have some of your time today. And the purpose of my presentation is to introduce the Commission to the characteristics of the climate smart approach and encourage the commissioners to revise the CEAP to focus more on climate change adaptation. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. This graphic should look familiar. Planning and implementation frameworks are fundamentally similar. You define the goals and objectives, assess vulnerabilities and opportunities, prioritize, implement, and make adjustments. So what's different about the climate smart approach? Well, science is heavily part of it. It informs the planning process during the vulnerability assessments and monitoring phases. But being climate smart means intentionally making a transition from a paradigm of protection and restoration, resisting change, to one that is open to anticipating and actively managing for endurable change. The challenge is to manage for desired outcomes with uncertainty clearly in mind and to enable public understanding of this need. The approach was developed by the persons shown, or the organizations shown at the bottom of this slide: the Forest Service, Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA, EPA, USGS, and Army Corps of Engineers, and many very smart people, including Marnie Koopman from non-governmental organizations. The National Wildlife Federation orchestrated the endeavor. To fully appreciate this adaptation approach, I recommend studying every chapter of the 2014 Climate Smart Conservation Guide. And I'm going to go through the 9 characteristics of climate smart planning so that everyone understands what I'm talking about. The first is to link actions to climate impacts. You identify resource values at risk using a range of climate change projections and science-based vulnerability assessments. Clearly articulate those risks based on science and prescribe actions that directly link planned actions to change projections. You acknowledge that the future will change the way things are. You expect to have winners and losers and allow time to grieve those changes. You evaluate whether persistence goals and objectives are realistic based on divergent projections of the future and vulnerability assessments. And it's important to understand the limits of resilience and resistance strategies and tactics. Resilience is a problematic word unless clearly understood that resilience nowadays does not mean recovering from harm back to where you were, but being able to survive into the future. It includes stakeholders in the process so they can buy into goals that may bother them. We're very fortunate to have the capacity and technology to test what might become reality in the future. Global change models and other forecasting tools are important to thinking about and dialoguing about the consequences of climatic change. We use GIS and climate change models and vulnerability assessments to envision and manage for change at the broadest landscape scale possible. We plan ahead to take advantage of severely altered landscapes, such as rebuilding using fire-resistant construction materials and techniques and planting water-wise, fire-wise, pollinator-friendly, climate change appropriate species following a severe wildfire, for example. You adopt strategies robust in an uncertain future. Identify why, what, where, and how every action proposed could mitigate forecasted climate change impacts. Engage in scenario planning based on a range of plausible future climatic conditions that change over time. Use decision support tools populated collaboratively by interdisciplinary specialists and decision makers, and be suspicious of single solution strategies. Diversify strategies and tactics across space and time, and don't be afraid to experiment. A comparison of the typical futuring planning perspective versus the scenario or multiple futures planning perspective is shown on this slide. The historical approach is to look ahead at a fairly narrow range of the future in terms of the environment and socioeconomic conditions, the cloud up there. But we know that no matter what happens, the future climate will be hotter. How much hotter is an open question. We don't know whether it will be wetter or drier on the West Coast, but we are learning that there will be more extremes. We can't predict how life on Earth will react, but we can forecast a range of plausible futures for many environmental and socioeconomic attributes. Through scenario planning, we can game the outcomes and look for opportunities to say what we need to survive, whether it is warmer, much hotter, drier, wetter, or much wetter. I find this graphic intimidating initially, but incredibly informative. It is out of date, but it gets the point across. The purpose of the graphic is to demonstrate how scenarios are created. The graphic demonstrates why it's wrong to focus on any one climate change prediction with confidence. The x-axis represents degree increase projections in degrees Fahrenheit, and the y-axis represents precipitation. If you look at the top row, above the midline, basically that's projections of the climate in the future being wetter than it is now on average, or drier below the line where the 0 is. And then it represents warmer and then much warmer over to the right. Climate change models such as GCMs are used to assess the climate envelopes for specific species and ecosystems if the future is drier, wetter, or unstable. Note that the predicted future climates relative to temperature and precipitation for a specific region dramatically varies amongst these 30 models. The 4 quadrants represent 4 divergent future climates. And a few models cluster in the mid-range, but that does not mean that the future climate will be in the mid-range. It could be anywhere.
Just a quick point, you have a couple of minutes left.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, forecasting the range of future can help us demonstrate impacts on crops, the economy, and people, and options for survival. Be prepared to be surprised. Manage for change with uncertainty clearly in mind. We must invest scarce resources carefully. So far, the climate change movement has primarily focused on minimizing CO2 release. The Ashland SEEP has done the same. Unfortunately, we are well beyond the point where we can count on life as we knew it. Nevertheless, minimization of carbon footprint is important with every project. We need to account for success. Monitoring is expensive and difficult, but we need to plan for experimentation and systematically build that into our plans. We need to support ecosystem services by safeguarding water, soils, natural processes, power generation, economic stability, and harness the capacity of nature to buffer human communities against the adverse impacts of climate change. And finally, ensure that actions taken to address climate change on one system do not exacerbate other climate-related vulnerabilities, do not disproportionately burden the most vulnerable, and avoid apathy, exaggeration, and arguments to do nothing or continue practicing old paradigms because of uncertainty about the future. So here is my conclusion. The Ashland SEEP is logically organized, graphically beautiful, and it actually has all the key characteristics of a climate smart approach. The phase 1 version is relatively climate smart roadmap for the city. Proposed actions are linked to projected climate impacts, threats, and supporting scientific rationale. My recommendations are that the SEEP needs to focus more on managing for change, adaptation options, and the next generation of the SEEP should take a deep dive into uncertain yet plausible future environments, social, economic conditions, to better adapt and lay out a plan for the vulnerabilities and risks we face. So that was my presentation. It's a lot quickly. I know there's no time for questions, comments, or reactions. But I have been trying to figure out how to communicate this to the commission or the city for a long time. I thank Tanya for helping me to direct my attention to you folks, and I am interested in helping to contribute to the City of Ashland's SEEP updating process.
Well, thank you. Are you Ray? Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to thank Charisse for your presentation and for your detailed study that you put in the public record here. And I think there are some good ideas here that we could use in incorporating future updates to the SEEP.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from commissioners? All right, well, thank you very much for your presentation. And I'm assuming that Mr. Cooper is not presenting himself, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so, and I actually missed who it was that volunteered to be the action. So moving on to old business. So I missed who it was that was going to volunteer to be the next action item recorder.
I think Jeff's doing it today and I'm doing it next meeting in May.
Terrific, thank you. This is a pitch for, Commissioner Barth asked me to put in a pitch for requesting anybody that might be attending this video conference to volunteer to be an additional commissioner for the Climate Policy Commission, because we are recruiting and would be delighted to have additional commissioners. Next item is 5.3. Ray was going to give us a review of formal planning.
Yeah, so the document I submitted, the changes, one of the first ones is that the Capital Improvement Program got adopted by the City Council on March 16th. And that the next things coming up will be for adoption is we have the Water Management and Conservation Plan, and then the TAP Master Plan in July. And that the Public Works has started working on the Wastewater Collection Master Plan, an update for that. No dates yet for completion of that. And as far as the Daniel Meyer Pool, we did have a tentative meeting in May between the parks and CPC. I haven't heard if that got pushed out at all. And as Stu mentioned, the electric 10-year planning study, we're waiting for the outcome of the budget plan for that. Hopefully we can still do that. And I also want to just point out that the new water treatment plant, that there's going to be a council study session on 4/19 for that, if anybody wants to tune into that. That's one of our largest capital improvement projects for the city in the near term. That's all I have. Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. I was curious about the the 10-year, what a 10-year scenario or 10-year plan. Why is this pushed out because of the budget? It seems like I don't see the relationship between contracting consultants, getting the terms of reference going. I thought the group has been working on this for some time, and this was going to be a relatively short-term effort. So I'm wondering why this has to be pushed out beyond the budget period.
Maybe Stu, you can answer that.
I think there is an interest in not making this project a target of opportunity to be cut.
Maybe we'll leave it at that, Bob.
Does that answer your question, Bob?
I guess so. Yes, it's an answer to my question.
Okay.
Okay, I have something else actually on the previous item that I was not quick enough to get in. So before you move on to the next one, I'd like an opportunity to say something.
Go ahead. Yep.
Okay, Julian. So on the commissioner recruitment, I just wanted to point out that three of us, the terms of three of us is ending at the end of this month. Jeff Wyatt, Julian Bell, and me. So with Stu's advice and Rick's advice, I reached out to Melissa Utala to just alert her and ask if there's any process for being re-upped. In case of Jeff and me, we've only been commissioners for less than a year, given the pause. So, but I don't know what the process is, and I haven't heard back. So anyway, if this is not, I guess if we're not reinstated, maybe we won't be seeing you next time as a panelist.
Oh no, you're not going to get away that easy.
There's no quitting. You have to keep going until dismissed. Did you have something that you wanted to add to that, Elizabeth?
Yeah.
I was surprised you haven't heard back, because Melissa said she emailed everyone that was up for reappointment this year, but I can follow up with her and just let her know that you guys have reached out, and she is coordinating with Mayor Aiken. So yeah, you should be hearing shortly. I'll double check with that. Sorry, you're getting the runaround.
No, I didn't get a runaround. I didn't hear back. It was just a couple of days ago that I reached out. I wasn't sure what the process was.
Okay, I'll double check with her then.
Any other comments or questions from people? So Commissioner Graham, Councilor Graham.
Yes, so I just wanted to follow up on the commissioner recruitment process and just put in a plug for us to really be looking for some diverse voices on this as we look at who else might come onto this process. We have tried unsuccessfully to get students from both the high school and the university on, but we do have another slot, and I think it's very important that we in these next appointments as they come up, that we really work hard to diversify our commission in a variety of ways: age, gender, and racial identity, if we can swing it. So let's put our thinking caps on to find out who might be interested in that position, who could help us diversify this group.
Okay. Very good. Moving on to our next agenda item. Stu, or sorry, pardon me. Yes, excuse me, Stu. Did you have an update about the process of measuring greenhouse gas emissions? And I'm sorry, toggling back and forth here.
Yes, I do. So I think that the current trajectory we're on as far as the SEEP update is we have a few discrete components that each of us is working on, and the idea being to keep developing those and revisit them on occasion until we get to the end. So it makes sense, I think, to start with an assessment of how we're doing, and this is very much a continuation of sort of the reporting that has happened in previous years. But I think, when we elected to move forward with this sort of 2021 implementation plan, or whatever it's called, it made sense to revisit each of these topic areas and just say, okay, here's how we're thinking about this. And per the template that Rick distributed earlier on, we have here Chapter 3. I'm going to trust that everybody had a chance to go through it prior to the meeting, but I'm going to skim through the document here and hit a few highlights. And if there's any questions, feel free to stop me. But essentially, we were talking about, a description of measurement. What is this at its core? Why are we thinking about it in this certain way? What's the rationale? And then what steps are in front of us? So I think as I reread this, I realized that it's a little wonky, but hopefully it's pretty straightforward because it's all things we've seen before, I think. But basically, we need to be able to measure how are we doing on our climate plan. There are a lot of different ways to do that, and every person I talk to sort of has a different feeling about how we think about progress. So I think it's super important that we be on the same page about how are we assessing this. So my proposal here is that any progress indicator will be simply that, an indicator of progress. It may or may not speak to a specific detail of the climate plan, but what it will do is answer a question of how are we doing to meet such and such a goal. Now, the SEEP has a lot of different goals. I think this maybe would be deserving of a quick tangent, which is there's two main goals in the SEEP, as we know, reducing emissions and adapting to climate change. But within the focus areas themselves, there are many other goals identified, and they're not called out very much in the SEEP after their one page of listing. So I think it's appropriate to keep evaluating those goals as we move forward, but to keep in mind that there's really two main goals, and we're setting ourselves the task actually of creating more goals because the adaptation side of our plan is quite deserving of more development. So basically, it's a long-winded way of saying this is going to be the shorthand for how we measure progress, at least for the SEEP as it's written so far. Now, I think, are there any questions up until this point? This feels very academic to me, so hopefully it seems like old news to you all. Okay. So as far as the rationale, I put down a few different bullet points here. Mainly we want to be focusing on our two goals to the extent that we want to reinforce the focus area goals as written. I think that's fine, but I really want to keep the focus on the two main goals, and especially to help us develop the adaptation side of the plan. It's really easy to get lost in the numbers, and what I find with the data, the reporting data, is that the numbers don't always mean what you might think. Many things are modeled, some things are empirical, some things are guesses. So we really have to keep that in mind as we move forward. But there is a way to assess virtually everything, which is the good news. Let's see. I think the main thing I want to say about this is we can create an indicator for basically whatever we want. I tried to keep it scoped to what is in the existing plan, so it would track pretty well. Folks have talked to me about adding all sorts of different indicators to the plan, and I think that that's fine if it makes sense in the context of the plan. But we don't need, I think, 100 different progress indicators. I think we can do quite well with a few, and that makes it much easier to track also. So let's see. The main thing I want to say about this is that it's really difficult to measure Scope 3 emissions in an accurate, locally appropriate way. So what we have here is a real emphasis on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, which is basically stuff that is emitting in city limits or as a result of, very nearby territory from people who live here. In our case, for example, I'm including someone lives in Ashland and they drive around a little bit in Medford. I'm including those emissions, at least for the purposes of our internal policy making decisions. The other thing is, and this is a bit of a departure from the traditional GHG inventory that we did in 2015. We're having a bit more of a market focus. So we're looking at our electricity as if it is actually hydropower and not a regional dirty coal mix. What that does is shifts the priority to defossilization, decarbonization in that way. Any questions about that? Hopefully I didn't just confuse everybody.
You mean questions about the last statement or about the whole project?
Either.
Well, have you completed your presentation?
No, I have not.
Oh, well then continue, please.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to point out, you know, because consumption is a real issue. It's a full half of our emissions. Okay, so I don't want folks to feel like I'm minimizing that, but for the purposes of measuring progress, it's not a very convenient or easy thing to measure. Someday there will be great big data products available to us to provide very customized information about what the aggregate Ashland citizenry is purchasing, and that will be very helpful. But until that time, we have the state to rely on. They have one of the best consumption emissions databases in the country, so we can use that to infer how's Ashland doing, and I think that will be very appropriate and save us a world of grief, and I don't think that their estimates are going to be any worse or better than what we could come up with on our own. So just to say, we will still look at consumption, but as far as these progress indicators today, there's definitely a focus on scope 1, scope 2, what's happening. This means energy, this means transportation fuel. Those are the big ones. Now, I think what I'll do just really quickly is zoom down to the second page of my thing here, because we have a lot of mitigation progress indicators. It's very easy to measure how much emissions are created from a gallon of fuel, for example. What we don't have is a lot of good adaptation progress indicators, and in part because we don't have very well-formed adaptation goals. So I think a big part of the SEEP update down the road will be to develop those adaptation goals more succinctly, and then to figure out how we can measure our progress towards those goals. I hope that the mitigation progress indicators that are presented here are pretty straightforward. It's basically looking at the amount of electricity, natural gas, and vehicle fuel in the city as a whole. Also looking at the carbon intensity of our electricity and gas, looking at the amount of EVs compared to regular vehicles, looking to the best that we can at mode share, which is kind of a weak spot. Jeff, you have a question? You're on mute. Jeff, you're on mute.
The missing mute.
Sorry about that. The solid waste, does that include recycled material?
Yes, it does. And actually, thank you for pointing that out. The solid waste is one part of the consumption sort of that we do track, and you can call it, in some ways it's scope 3, in some ways it's not, but it's something we have access to the data, and I think it's directly related to local consumption patterns here, so we are absolutely going to include that, yeah. And I would say, I guess the last thing, the goal of these is not just to collect the data, but to collect the data and try to see if we're making the right choices, and to see if we're getting anywhere. You know, in some cases, it's easy to tell. In some cases, it's not. Like, for example, our estimated transportation emissions come from a sort of state-derived mileage assessment and average vehicle efficiency. It doesn't say anything about what actual people in Ashland are doing, but what we do know is how many people in Ashland own zero-emission vehicles. So we can work with the data to get an idea, but it might not be an instantaneous read of exactly what's happening in Ashland. So I think the other thing to keep in mind is a lot of this data is 18 months old at the best. Sometimes we can get more current than that, but can be a significant lag in reporting. So everything we look at is kind of like for the long haul. Okay, I feel like I'm talking a lot, and I hope that that's all really clear and makes a lot of sense, but if it doesn't, I would really like to know that. Ray and then Bob.
Okay, Stu, I like your mitigation progress indicators. I think it would be very useful to help us set some targets. You know, we have an overall 8% per year, but it'd be nice to be able to understand our emissions and be able to set a realistic target and see if we can make progress there. The other thing is on adaptation, I do think that will probably be more of an important part of this, because regardless of what we do for emissions in Ashland, our temperatures and climate are going to be driven by what happens in Oregon, the United States, and the globe.
Yeah.
And given the progress that's happening there, adaptation is probably going to hit us harder up front.
Yeah.
And just one thing, looking at smoke here, one of the things maybe for housing, you have unhoused population. Maybe we should also try to look at how much housing has the capability to filter their air and control their temperature during the hot periods.
Yeah, that's a good data point. Rick and I have talked about that. I think it says something in there about a resiliency indicator, protection against bad air quality. That was sort of the direction we were thinking of that, at least I was. The question I have really is how can we derive that data?
Yeah.
And that's the tricky bit is, can we do it?
You gotta know what you're looking for first.
Mm-hmm. Can we do it? And then can we do it again next year and get a reliable repeat? And, you know, will that data collection work moving forward is the other question. So, but yes, I agree. That's a really important thing and something we could certainly measure. If not directly the problem, we could certainly measure the application of a solution.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Bob,
then Tanya.
Thanks, Stu. I think you do a really great job on your annual presentations to the council and reporting on how the city is doing, how the city and the community is doing. That's a lot that you report on, a lot of indicators. And I guess so I'd like to say something about measurement in general, also related to your next presentation, I think, to the council. Not that you should change the indicators, but I think of measurement in the sense of what it's for. It's for policymakers, to my mind, it's for policymakers and it's for the general public. Those are two slightly different audiences, but of course there's quite a bit of overlap. And I think that the indicators are most useful when they tell us what's happening, so they can tell us how well we're doing. But they've got to be clear. They've got to be consistent. Are they telling a consistent story? And they're telling a believable story. So asking what's the takeaway message from the set of indicators, I think is really useful when communicating it both to the policymakers and to the general public. So it's not just a whole list of indicators, but it's like the batches of indicators that are telling always asking what's the takeaway message. And then I think the key thing that I think Charisse Sidoriak was also saying in her report is using the indicators to say, well, is there something we should be doing differently? Is not that we're doing something, well, I mean, if you're not achieving our objectives, then we're clearly need to be doing something differently, but the indicators ideally would point us to the places that we should be putting more attention, putting different attention, and that sort of thing. And all of this communication is so hugely important in order to really tell the story so that people can understand where we are. People that don't take a lot of time to go through a whole bunch of materials, or don't watch your fascinating presentation to the council. So finding a way that information can get out onto the website, can get out into the community through other fora, I think is just as important as the indicators themselves. So I hope all of that would be kind of like part of it an engagement strategy and communication strategy for the city that we can all help with, and that it's not just indicators themselves. Otherwise, as you said yourself, it feels kind of wonky and academic and not real. But yeah, thank you for working on this. I think you're doing a great job, and look forward to supporting you on it.
Thank you.
Councillor Graham.
The Wildfire Safety Commission is doing quite a bit of work helping people reduce their wildfire risk, and they have some programming that could allow potentially for some of this measurement on wildfire risk reduction. So there is potentially an integration point there. We may be able, I can certainly reach out and ask that question in terms of what we might be able to measure through the process that they're doing.
Commissioner Schaaf.
I just wanted to add that these measurement efforts are really, I think, a way to inform the CPC as to what policies need to be changed or modified or adjusted going forward. So I think it's critical for us to look at these measurement tools as ways to inform us as to what policies and recommendations that we want to formulate to the council. So that's a different thing than informing the public or informing the council. It's really how we use them going forward to modify and change policy to reflect the reality of what we face.
One other question from me. Do you have, I think that you told me before, Stu, that the amount of natural gas consumed by the city is reported on the city's website somewhere, but I'm wondering or it's possible to get the information through the city's website, I believe is what you told me.
Yeah, so usually my annual report is the best place to get that, because I normally get the annual update from Avista kind of just prior to that. So it's really not very out of date when I give that report, and I don't get it month by month. So I do have it going back a number of years. It used to be part of the Climate Dashboard 1.0 that doesn't exist anymore. It was only updated for the first year or two that I was here. But as part of the new website build, we do plan on building the metrics in. That'll happen after my report goes to council sometime.
And do you know how frequently the new information is going to be updated? Is it is it going to be annual or every other month, or?
You know, it's going to be once per year unless something else changes. I try to collect and collate the data as I receive it, so it's not too onerous to do the final update, but it's quite a bit of work to process it and put it into context with the other emissions. Just the raw data is not that hard, but you know, once we have the dashboard up and running, maybe that could change. But right now, it doesn't come in a convenient timing, and it's not easy to get out. So we're trying to fix both of those problems. But I don't expect to be getting more access to Avista data. It's gotten a little bit leaner and a little bit, I don't know, I don't want to say inaccessible. It's just, it's not like a real-time thing that I can report on easily.
Okay. But they
for city facilities, I should say that for city facilities, I do know every month, because it's just like your house. You can log in and look. But for the community as a whole, I don't get that information in the same timeliness.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other discussion of that topic? We're a little bit behind schedule here, I think. So the next topic, pardon me, I wasn't actually looking to see if anybody said yes. Any further discussion? No. The next topic is actually Commissioner Barth's presentation. And I have a sort of an extremely expedited summary of that I can give you, which maybe fits with our time frame appropriately. So Commissioner Barth submitted a couple of different things to the group, a Mother Jones article and a podcast. Some of the important maybe points from that are that there besides for the global warming potential of methane or natural gas components as they get released into the atmosphere, their natural gas is actually not, or it produces quite a lot of direct toxicity sort of right in front of the gas range. And so if you happen to be cooking with gas, you're exposed to potential air pollutants like carbon monoxide and other products of combustion. And so although the natural gas industry has presented itself as being, you know, clean and green and healthy and all the rest of it, they actually produce plenty of pollution right at the point of your range in front of your face. One of the other things from the podcast that was important is that it seems that for the natural gas industry, they sell, you know, natural gas is sold to a variety of different businesses or activities, but 87% of gas revenue actually comes from heating of buildings. And so, you know, per sort of an indirect analysis, virtually all the profits of the natural gas industry, or a substantial slice of the profits from the natural gas industry, are related to selling gas for heating space, like homes or buildings. And so, you know, if it was, so that would, eliminating that part of the business by replacing it with electric heating systems would cause, I think, scaling back of the industry as a whole. So that's one thing to consider. Another thing that is sort of related to that is that the natural gas industry relies a lot on loans to continue to drill new wells, and meaning fracking wells. And the new fracking wells generally go to paying the interest of the preceding fracking wells. So the industry, as I understand it, operates kind of on a very fragile margin. And if their revenue were to stop for any, you know, length of time, they would not be able to pay the interest on their own loans. And it's possible that the industry would also be abruptly curtailed as a result of that. Another thing that Commissioner Barth wanted to point out is that the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality is the Rulemaking Advisory Committee is looking at a community climate investment fund. And some of the information about that was presented in the slides that Commissioner Barth forwarded to the group, and I hope everybody got those. And I know, or I believe Rick is actually listening or part of the conversation at the moment. I don't know if you have any other things to add at this point, Rick, but if you did, then there'd be a good time to add them. Any questions about any of the things that I went over there?
I did not send the slides.
Say that one more time, sorry?
I did not send the slides. I sent you the link, Julian. Did not go
over
anything else.
Pardon me. Okay. Any comments from anybody else? No. So Commissioner Wyatt, do you have, can you go ahead with your natural gas emissions reduction policy review?
Yes, thank you. I thought I would begin by kind of framing the whole discussion about natural gas a little bit. Then we've had a couple conference calls with people that were associated with the work going on in the city of Eugene, and some of that's kind of hot off the press. We'll update you, Ray and I will update you on that. Excuse me, it's a little bit of allergy season here. I presume that you've read this white paper that kind of gives a status update on Eugene. So we'll update that today. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ray, and Ray can talk a little bit about our thinking on the short, medium, and long-term actions that are possible. So starting out, framing the vision that's presented in the SEEP is net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And the goal to get there was to reduce our emissions by 8% on average every year through 2050. So that's kind of the vision. So I was wondering, for me, I was a little confused about what the definition of policy was in the context of what we're talking about here. So the Merriam-Webster dictionary says it's a high-level overall plan embracing the general goals and acceptable procedures. So high-level plan, basically, that embraces the goals. And we know what the goals are. We know what the visions are. And then the policies are implemented through communications, things like land use, building codes, contracts, incentives, and ordinances. So that's kind of the difference, in a sense, between what a policy is and what an implementation plan is. And then the CDC, for some reason, I find myself on CDC's website every now and again. They say to develop a policy, you start with identifying the problem, then you do policy analysis. And the CEAP did some of that, but that's something that I think that's the stage we're at right now, is policy analysis. Then the policy is further developed largely by city staff and maybe some folks on the commission. And then the policy is then enacted, and that's where the city council comes in. So day before yesterday, we talked to an attorney that works for a nonprofit called Breach Collective. This is a legal advocacy group in the climate change arena, and they're associated with the Sabin Center at Columbia Law School in New York. So pretty competent, pretty high-powered group. They have been working with the city of Eugene and Portland in the Pacific Northwest. A guy from a nonprofit advocacy group called Cascadia Wildlands also participated in this discussion. The Breach Collective will be sending a letter next week to the Eugene City Council outlining the legal basis for the actions the city might take to limit and regulate natural gas usage. So we expect to get a copy of that kind of legal dissertation, that legal letter, next week. And they promised, as moving forward, that they would share information with us. We also had a little bit of a discussion about confidentiality, because they view the natural gas industry in a sense as an adversary. But they are very clear that when they're dealing with a city commission like this, that we're public and everything that we do is open to the public. They had several recommendations for us to get started. They said we need to understand our own greenhouse gas emissions and goals. So I think we clearly have some goals. They said then the next step is understand what the natural gas footprint looks like in Ashland. I think Stu has a lot of that, but that's, how many customers, what are the connections, the usage numbers, income, dollars, all of that. And then formulate a policy to meet those goals. And part of that formulation, they said, must involve intensive community involvement. As an example, if you're going to do 8% per year reduction in natural gas usage, you can't add any more connections. Or if you do, how do you offset the added connections? So those are the type of really tough questions that the community really has to buy into, and there needs to be broad-based support before you take that to the city council. Their opinion was that a franchise agreement is not the preferred mechanism for reducing natural gas, greenhouse gas emissions, because it's clearly not in the utility's best interest. And there's, we have a whole book now on how the industry opposes new regulation. And so they say the utilities will both stall and oppose changes that limit their business. It's in essence an existential threat. So their preferred approach would be to use incentives, code changes, and moratoriums buttressed by strong public support. That's the approach that they recommend. And again, we can expect to get their legal opinions and materials over the next several months. Ray and I this afternoon, and Ray chime in as necessary, we talked to Ethan Nelson. Stu, you probably know this guy. He works for the city of Eugene, and he was the lead negotiator in their franchise agreement. He said the natural gas utility is not interested in cooperating in any way in limiting their business. Electric utilities, on the other hand, see a pathway forward, so they're willing to transition, for example, off of coal onto solar and wind and so on. There's the list that you saw in the materials we presented had, I don't know, 40 or 50 different California cities that had enacted in one form or another bans on gas or connections, things like that. Ethan's comment was that these bans are all in dual use utilities. For example, you have a utility that provides both gas and electricity. Those utilities will be happy to transition from gas to electricity. When you have non-dual use utilities like Avista here or Northwest Natural Gas in Portland and Eugene, they are absolutely not interested in cooperating with these efforts at all. Let's see, winding up here. His recommendation was to, before you get too serious about starting anything in this area, that community engagement is absolutely critical. And then there was talk about a contingent business tax that would cover the expiration of the franchise fee if the franchise agreement was discontinued in the future. Eugene did that somewhat inadvertently, so they're not experiencing a drop in revenue because their franchise agreement expires. So that's it. So Ray, I would turn it over to you for comment and maybe talk about some of these actions.
Okay, Jeff. So as Jeff mentioned, there's a lot of work to do to develop a policy. And so in parallel with that, where we're looking, we sort of did a little brainstorming with Stu and what actions might we be able to do while we're developing this policy from either a planning perspective or incentive perspective, a couple of things that Jeff talked about. So if you had a chance to read it, I put in some short-term, medium-term, and long-term actions. And some of these actions also dovetail into what Bob is going to talk about later in terms of the need to get community awareness and support along the residential population as well as the commercial or industrial side of the fossil gas use. A couple of these in terms of incentives, I don't know if we offer any incentives nowadays for natural gas hookups, but we want, if we do, we wouldn't want to do that. Okay, Stu's saying no. Okay, good. The other thing would be to have our builders required to provide enough capacity in the circuit breakers to go all electric in houses, even if they do build them initially with some fossil gas infrastructure. And starting out with, say, single residential homes, and then longer term looking at subdivisions. We're having quite a lot of building going on in Ashland, so this is something we should probably be thinking about. And then we have our other increasing incentives for electrification. So I think we've talked about that with any additional revenues we can get from our electrical capacity. The other thing here, we know that replacing the energy that we use for heating, which is primarily heating from natural gas, we need to be able to understand if our electric utility is going to be able to support the additional capacity or load that would be needed to replace that. So that's something else that we could do in parallel. So there are others listed here, but I just touched on a few of them.
Yeah, I would add to this 10-year study for electric utility capacity is kind of, you know, a critical piece, not just for the electrical utility, but also planning forward on how fast you would transition from natural gas or fossil gas to electricity.
Yeah, I think we realize this is going to take time. It's not something you can just shut off. I don't know if it's 10 years, 20 years, whatever. And then obviously, we're looking at the legal options. So that's what Jeff talked about earlier. And of course, if we could pass anything at the state level, that would certainly help.
Commissioner Schaaf?
I was kind of following back up with Jeff, who noted that in the cities that have established a no hookup policy, that the utilities who were providing the services had both electricity and gas, so that transition for the utility itself was relatively easy. But my understanding too was that in each case, the jurisdiction relied upon provisions in the California Building Code that explicitly give them the flexibility to prohibit future natural gas hookups, and wondering if that's something that we need to communicate to Breach Collective to ensure that they don't make the presumption that Oregon building codes provide that same flexibility to local government, which again, to my understanding, it is not possible in Oregon.
I think there is a bill under current legislation to allow reach codes.
Right, but
we'll see how far it gets.
Right, the question really is that reach code provide the flexibility to in fact prohibit new natural gas connections? Obviously in California, that is evidently legal and possible, but are we, because of the different regulatory environment that we have in Oregon, are we going to be able to even pursue that?
That is a question for the future. That's why it's not listed as a current action that we could take.
But I'll capture that as an action item and pass that on to the Breach Collective.
Okay. I could probably also follow up with the two of you about the details around that.
So question for you, Stu. Do you know off the top of your head, does Bonneville Power have sufficient power for us to purchase that would actually cover the, like the ramping up of all the, or the conversion of all the natural gas appliances to electric? I mean, my understanding is that they basically do.
Well, between now and the end of our current power contract, certainly.
Okay, what happens after that?
We need a new contract.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be elusive. I mean, given the speed at which we could switch off natural gas and increase electric, supply is not an issue for the duration of the current contract we have. In the future, it could become an issue because BPA has reduced output or increased needs in other places, or it could be that we choose to get power from somewhere else. It's hard to say. I think the general idea is that as we defossilize and electrify, we're going to also be looking at high efficiency and additional conservation opportunities. So we're hopeful. I mean, the worst case would be a doubling of our usage. Maybe not the most pessimistic worst case, but a realistic worst case would be a doubling. But it'll really shift our load profile. It's a complicated question. I think given the fact that we're a full requirements customer and we don't manage our own production, there shouldn't be a big problem in that area.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments from the group?
Yeah, Julian, I guess I would just add that's why we have it down as an action for us to continue to follow up with.
Sure.
Doing our own capacity analysis so we know that answer.
It's a good question to ask, though. I think, Eugene did a study not so long ago about posing the question, if everyone had an electric vehicle and plugged in at the same time, what would happen? Obviously, if you paint a picture like that, you can create a lot of problems. But I think as we grow into the new paradigm, whatever that is, we'll have to be a little bit adaptable. And, part of that will be more efficient use of electricity, grid management, and, new technologies coming online.
Bob?
I think actually Tanya maybe had something.
Oh, sorry. Did I miss Tanya?
Yeah, I think that this points to how important it is that we are looking at our electrical system, and also what kind of production might we bring online before the new contract. And there are multiple things that are coming in all at the same time as we work towards electrification. But I think it's going to be what is that mix of what we can buy, what we can produce, what we can save by conservation, in addition to the fact that Ashland is going to grow in the next 10 years. We are continually approving at the council level larger housing developments, and so that are already going to push us past the Portland State University estimates. Just with what we've got in the pipeline, we're going to go past what they're probably talking about for the next bit of time, depending on, especially if we're able to attract a more diverse residential base. So there's a lot of moving parts here. And that's why I'm glad to see this commission is really looking at multiple pieces of this as we push to get off of fossil gas.
Sorry, Tanya, you said that we're exceeding the Portland State University.
So all of our master planning processes are based off of population estimates, and everybody in the state has to look to the same program at Portland State University to get their population estimates. But I suspect that because there is so much uncertainty happening right now, I think we should be careful with those population estimates. I think we should assume that there's a decent chance that Ashland is going to grow quite a bit faster than what those population estimates say. And so how we look at our grid capacity is going to be very important in all of this, and making sure we've got the capacity to actually electrify.
Okay, very good. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so Commissioner Kaplan, can you go over natural gas emission reduction implementation?
I have one.
Jeff has some.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, pardon me, I missed you.
One of the takeaways from our interactions was the importance of community involvement, and that means that we need to spend more time and effort working with our counterpart commission. So let's keep that in mind, and maybe we need to formalize that in this area.
Okay. Any comments, Stu? Okay.
I mean, I support that.
Okay. All right, Bob.
Thank you. So I circulated in the packet something called a path off natural gas. This is really something that you started, Julian, back in February, and you should recognize the pros intro to that, which is basically what you wrote and submitted to the commission back in February, where you were talking pretty passionately, I think, about the importance of engaging the community and to understanding what is natural gas and why is it why should we be thinking about getting off of it. So all I really did is I tried to build on the work that you started and built it out as an outline. I like to do things as an outline for discussion. I see this as kind of a living document, and you and Tanya joined me in looking at this and putting this together. And I think really this dovetails quite nicely with what Jeff and Ray just presented. I see there's three basic pieces to it. The first one is community engagement, community engagement, community engagement. So no surprise that should be where we start. I don't think that needs to be done sequentially, though, with the next piece, which I think is research. There's a lot of research that needs to be done. We know some. Stu told us that we get the consumption figures from Avista once a year. Of course, there's also a possibility of getting other slightly more frequent data, I assume, from the franchise data that comes in, the finance data must come in a little bit more frequently. I think you said last time, Stu, that comes in quarterly. So one could interpret some of that and get it if we wanted to. But the point really is that there's a lot of other more granularity that I think we need. And that's the point too in this outline, which is really putting.
Sorry, just one second. Did you have some comment on that, Stu?
Oh, I didn't want to interrupt though. I was just going to say you're right. I think that the utility billing does receive that quarterly. Just normally I get the annual summary, but there are pathways. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think the point really is that that's just one number. We need to get more granularity about that, and that's where the number two in the outline really is trying to figure out, who's using gas and how much are they actually using. And it would be nice to really find a way to tease that out by the kind of consumer and also the age and location of gas fueled equipment. And that's really a lead into the third prong of this, which is in order to phase out gas equipment. It's not just an abrupt stop as we've discussed. We need to understand what are the policy levers that the city actually has and where can the state act. We've already talked about this. I think Jeff and Ray's research with Eugene really informs that quite nicely. The city of Ashland has a lot of control over its own operations and could simply decide to cut back or within a certain time frame could put in process to do that. And in some ways has already started down that path. Parks is going to be a big piece of that because I think the largest city consumer of natural gas is the pool. So that front and center on the city's table is going to be a decision very soon about whether to get off natural gas with its largest use or continue on and lock that in for another 20 or 30 years. There are other consumers as well. There's SOU, there's a school district, there's a Sante Community Hospital. And then there are other commercial establishments. The idea is really, though, to figure out who's using gas, how much are they using, how old is the equipment. As equipment reaches the end of its useful life, we want to try to, I think, from a just common sense perspective, we want that to be replaced with electric equipment. And we want to tune our incentives to make that, city incentives or other financing options to make that as easy as possible for residents and businesses so that they don't just do what's the easiest possible thing. Your hot water needs, your gas hot water needs replacing. What do? You put in a new gas hot water heater. Well, no, actually what we need to do is help people to take advantage of the option to switch at that point. And those that can afford to switch earlier, or those that are really committed to doing something about reducing our community's climate footprint, can retire their gas water heater earlier, or their gas furnace heater, or swap out their gas range for a much better performing induction stovetop. Had to put in a plug for that because there's not any comparison between a gas stovetop and a much higher quality, much better performing gas induction stovetop. And there are some restaurants in town that actually do have induction stovetops, and we should be getting them to talk about it. Sorry, I have one plug. Excuse me?
Is there one that you happen to know of off the top of your head?
Yes, there's one right downstairs from my house.
Okay.
I'll
go there.
Oh, you meant
Same
a restaurant?
here.
You meant a restaurant?
I meant a restaurant, yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
Masala cooks with induction.
Oh, good to know. Terrific.
So that's a plug for going to eat at Masala. If I'm allowed to do that on city time. Let's see, where am I? I think there is one other interesting wrinkle on this, which has got to do with funding. We talked about the limits on city funding for home energy retrofits 2 sessions ago. I guess it was in February. And you know, in doing some of the research on this, we've ran into what they're doing in Missoula, where there's and this is again Julian's idea, an offset program. Missoula is actually, it's not the city, it's a community group in Missoula that has actually started it's something called the Missoula Footprint Fund. And they used that fund to attract people that wanted to offset their carbon emissions, their personal carbon emissions, but weren't ready to swap off of natural gas or airplane flights or whatever they were doing that was leading to their carbon emissions. And they paid into a fund that actually allowed Missoula to put in high efficiency heat pump space heaters in a low income housing project, rather than resistance heaters, which were going to be, in this case, it wasn't getting off natural gas, but it could be off natural gas. And I think in this case, if we could imagine an offset program that could fund a swap, helping people swap out of a gas equipment into electric equipment, and it's a clear additionality argument that that is a reduction, full stop, of carbon emissions that one could buy down into. So that would be something that would help to achieve our climate objectives, would help to achieve low income or affordable housing objectives as well, with swapping out of gas into electric, and it's a way that we should be thinking about it. All of these things that I put in the outline, I think I'm going on a little bit. All of these things I put in the outline are really just, they're bullets in an outline. I think every one of them needs further work. I see this as kind of a work program for the commission and for staff. So I'd like to put this this outline out there for us to dig into. I think it's completely consistent with what Jeff and Ray already talked about as what we need to be doing. I think we just need to get doing it and see how we can help Stu and Bridget and others in the city to pull together the information and start working with the community and with the Climate Conservation and Climate Outreach Commission and others in the community that are interested in doing this. Community engagement is absolutely the first one of the first things that we need to do, because people don't realize that it's a problem and you're not getting, and I think that I wrote down somewhere that Jeff's takeaway is that there has to be intense community involvement in order to make a policy stick, any kind of policy on this, because we know that there's going to be pushback. There's going to be pushback from the industry that is earning income from it. The city also is a partner. It's a franchisee. The gas utility is a franchisee of the city. It's a partner. So that's a sensitive thing. And so the community has to be on board. So I think I'll stop there. I don't really have an ask on this other than that, let's use this outline as a building block for building it out and then putting together a plan for the next steps over the next 6 months of work of the commission and other commissions. Jeff.
In our discussions with the city of Eugene, they pointed out that gas utilities have what they called a playbook to block climate action. And so that at this point is pretty well known. So whatever our community engagement plan turns out to be, we need to make sure that we counter that playbook, or at least respond to it. There's some good points, economic impact and things, but we need to have the counter arguments.
We already saw some of that, Jeff, when those of us who went to the regional, what is it, the IEP of Avista a few weeks back, where they talked about energy choice, they talked about renewable natural gas. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors about, ways that, gas is the solution. It's not a problem. Add to that, full scale press about the benefits and the advantages of loving my gas stove. Everybody loves their gas stove until they try an induction stove instead. Not electric. There's electric resistance electric, and there's induction. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that all electric stove tops are the same.
Commissioner Hey, right.
Yeah, okay. Bob, so with respect to your first two big ones, the education and the inventory, do we, I would think that we need some of the inventory work to be done before we start our education or presenting education. That I would think we would want to present both, right? This is our use in Ashland. These are our emissions. These are why we need to reduce the emissions, and then all the other part of the education.
I think, yeah.
And you mentioned something like a 6-month timeline. Is that what we're thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I put things out. I said 6 months. I said 6 months ? That's kind of what I think would take. I think I don't know. I don't call it so much education as engagement. I think it's really when we had this conversation the last time. Okay. It's a two-way thing. There's a lot of questions about this. There's a lot of We
probably need a survey, along with that.
I think that's right. I think this would be useful. And Gary had some great suggestions about listening to the SOCAN session a few weeks ago. Good question, a good suggestion to add about hoods. How many people are actually using their hood to vent the fumes that are coming off of their stovetop, their gas cooker? Most people, according to, and research from others, don't ever use their hood when they're cooking. So they're polluting their indoor environment. They're not cooking with their windows open unless it's, I don't know, spring or fall. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things that can happen. You're right, though, that a piece of the education or the engagement needs to be, well, what is the scope of the issue, the situation here? I don't know. To my sense, that we're so far. There's so much that people don't realize about natural gas that you can start educating about what it is even before you talk about specifically what we're facing here in Ashland. And I think it's probably better not to talk about what we're facing here in Ashland just as the first thing, because that's the second step, really. It's yeah, Tanya.
I was just going to say that I would like to continue to work on this with you, Bob, and Julian, if you're both game. I think it dovetails really nicely with some of the conversations that are happening with other folks in terms of some integrated engagement, and I'm in those conversations. So I would like to continue. I'd like to help with this and continue to help. And I also just wanted to let you all know that I was in a conversation with our finance director and just brought up the conversation, having seen the reference that Julian found for the Missoula Footprint Fund, and that something like that is possible at the city. And it is also possible with a local organization, but there are some pathways for that for us to move forward with here. So I would like to carry on working on this as part of the commission.
Great.
Commissioner Wyatt.
I'm fishing for an action item here. How do we engage the Climate Outreach Commission?
I think that by the time that we come back together again next month, we'll have a proposal for what an integrated engagement process might look like.
Great. So do I put your name on that action item, Tanya?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Tanya's the only person who's on both commissions. So, well, Stu, it's Tanya and Stu are on both commissions.
All right, any other questions or comments or discussion?
Is there something that anyone thinks is off base on this? Are we something that we shouldn't be doing? Something we get one of these items that is going to be a distraction or is not necessary?
Not me.
Yeah, I think it's too early to tell at this point, Bob. I like the list.
And then in terms of the white paper that you, Ray, and Jeff put together, how do we make sure that we're not duplicating, or I'm happy for you to take on the research piece of it, that because you did. There's quite a bit about research there. So you didn't
comment.
Go ahead.
What I think would be very useful,
Rick. Okay.
Integrate these things. And so I was hoping that a less than quorum group of commissioners would take on that task for next time. The obvious ones being Bob, Ray, Jeff, and Tanya. Or it seemed like, no, I'm not trying to cut you off, Julian. That's 4 people, and that's all we can have. Because I don't think these are obviously orthogonal. They are very integrated. And we needed to have a single integrated plan that the whole commission understands.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so maybe before the next meeting, we should get together offline and decide which groups could handle which parts of this. I think we've already suggested a few options. We're working on the legal and the inventory, and then there's the education part, and see how many pieces there are. Maybe there's 5 main ones, and whatever, who works on what.
Okay, sounds great.
Bob, could you articulate that in a way that I can get on paper? And
I think what Rick was suggesting is that 4 commissioners, which would be Jeff, Ray, Tanya, and me, would get together to think about the 2 pieces of paper that in front of us, and how we can proceed for the next meeting, how we can bring this forward with a work plan, a multi-month work plan. Does that make sense?
Okay, anything else?
For me.
So Commissioner Schaaf, did you want to go over your transportation?
Sure. Well, as you can well imagine, the paper that I distributed provides, come on, it's not going to work. A lot of detail, and Elizabeth, it's not going to work for me. And consequently, those details obviously bring up a lot of controversy and potentially difficulty moving forward. But I think a good kind of departure point for the discussion about transportation and land use is that as a community, our emissions really won't affect the ultimate outcome of climate change. While there may be a moral obligation for us to attempt to reduce them to the degree that is possible, when you translate that into the impact worldwide, it just isn't going to matter. Howsoever, we do have the potential to provide leadership and demonstration, if you will, on some level that could potentially at least influence other communities. And I think this topic, urban land use and transportation, is one that if we could figure out a way to move forward, we could potentially change the paradigm that is currently prevalent throughout the West, and as far as that goes, throughout the entire nation, in terms of how the transportation system works and how land use can be made more efficient to create a transportation efficient land use pattern. So kind of skipping over all the background, what I really would like us to focus on are the actual policies and goals that I've developed in terms of how those would actually help us to achieve a transformation, really, of the transportation system. So let's go to the next slide, please, Elizabeth. Thank you again. So we've talked about the 2017 SEEP goals and alluded to them frequently throughout the meeting today, and rightfully so. They really set out our goalposts, if you will. Next slide. But how are we going to achieve that? Obviously, with the goal, or with the measurement of 8% per year, we've certainly failed to actualize that reduction. So we need to really come back, I think, and look at not only our goals, but also our policies related to each kind of sector of emissions. And as the SEEP describes it, we have one under urban land use and transportation. And the goals and the policies that are developed are under land use, at least, are shown in this goal 1. And it focuses actually on creating a context for the transportation system to serve something other than automobiles. And that is essential for us to transition from the transportation system that we have now and the land use system that we have now into something that is both more sustainable and has much less carbon impact. So my question is, are these goals and policies as described, are they the kind of goals and policies that the CPC sees as being helpful? Are they too grand? Are they not grand enough? Are we only kind of substituting ambitious policies for ones that are equally ambitious, but not, that won't lead to substantive change? So I've tried to write these so that the goals are measurable. For instance, in this first goal, we want to be able to see an increase in the development of high density residential dwellings in the area that will be served by RVTD's high capacity transit route. And truthfully, the city's land use plan really has that largely wired. Most of the higher density land uses are within a quarter mile of that route that would run down Siskiyou and back up 66 using Coleman Creek, or not Coleman. Basically the transit triangle area. And similarly, we should be able to measure how and whether new development is in fact served with bicycle and pedestrian networks, and monitor that over time to ascertain whether we're actually achieving our goal. The policies, in contrast to the goal, are really about actionable things that the city can do to actually help bring about changes that will contribute to the goal. For instance, we want to make sure that employees can actually use the transit system and the bicycle system that we potentially can develop and access that readily. So finding a way to fund basically subsidies for choosing an alternative mode is an important facet of achieving a more efficient transportation efficient land use system. Similarly, we should ensure that public and subsidized workforce housing are located where they can access transit services. Pretty straightforward and pretty smart. And then similarly, we need to figure out incentives that can facilitate the intensification of land uses around the transit triangle. All those things, if we were to implement them, act on them, that is, could and will increase the efficiency of the transportation system as well as the land use patterns in the city. Any comments on this goal and these policies?
Yeah,
because we've got more.
Yeah, Gary.
Go ahead, Bob.
I think you captured it very, very well. I think this is terrific. The only thing that I would say is I'm not sure that that transit triangle is the only place that satisfies that. And you also mentioned Croman Mill, but there are other places, there are other lots of land in the city that are developable over the medium term. There's that place in the railroad district that's on the other side of the railroad tracks that has some issues, but over the long term could also be developed with the same sort of approach. And I guess there's something that was recently approved on the north side of town as well. I don't know what the density is there, but I think it's a higher density zoning there as well, if I recall correctly. So it just not to be limited to this, but make this extensive to all larger development sites. The city.
The key in some ways, and clearly it relates to the efficiency of public transit, and the transit corridor is anticipated to have 10-minute headways, and those 10-minute headways translate into a very convenient public transit system, which is really not practical except in areas that have a high concentration of both employment and residential use. And those are the reasons that those particular areas, the Croman Mill site and the transit triangle, as well as downtown actually, because it too is served with the high density or high frequency transit. And again, certainly as we look toward the integration of alternative modes so that there is a better and more efficient transfer between one and the other, we can anticipate that the transit system might more effectively reach those lower density areas. But in terms of modifying and refining the city's land use plan to the degree that we can focus higher density development in those transit corridors, I think it will yield a more efficient land use and transportation system overall. But yes, I do understand your comment. Thank you.
Commissioner Wyatt?
Gary, I have what's probably a dumb question, but if you go visit Florida or Arizona, places that have a higher population of elderly people, you see a lot of golf carts, electric golf carts and stuff. What is the status? Why can't golf carts be zipping around on Ashland streets? Because old folks can't ride bikes. Well, not all of them, anyway.
Speak for yourself, Jeff.
Yeah.
that's a question that I don't have an answer to, but certainly tricycles are commonly used by people who might not otherwise have adequate bicycle handling or balancing skills. So it's really a matter of finding the right mode, but I really don't have an answer to that. My guess is that they aren't considered a motor vehicle and therefore aren't licensed and can't be operated on the public highway, but that's conjecture on my part. I really don't know.
Ray.
Gary, your first policy 1-1, I'm wondering why it's limited to employees. Shouldn't it be anybody who wants to use these alternative transits besides the vehicle?
That policy relates back to one of the implementation strategies, which specifically articulated the notion of having a surcharge on business licenses that then would be dedicated to providing transit subsidies as well as bicycle and walking incentives, but it would really depend upon the source of the funding, in my estimation. If the source of the funding was sufficiently broad, then those subsidies could be extended more broadly. But with the consumption...
I understand. I didn't quite know where the funding was coming from. All right.
Right.
Thanks.
That's the logic, right? Again, all of this is just food for thought in some ways. We have a transportation system, a land use system, and a vehicle fleet that is largely fixed, right? So we're trying to figure out how to influence that and bring about change. These goals and policies hopefully will help to do that. Let's move on to the next slide. So the second goal really addresses public transit and really builds upon what RBTD articulated in their 2440 transit plan, except in large part it moves up the time frame for implementation of some of the activities that they identified. So the goal is to improve the effectiveness of public transit and increase transit mode share, doubling transit mode share in the city between 2025 and 2035 and doubling it again by 2050. Again, it's a measurable goal. The policies are meant to be actionable. So again, policy 2.1 would see us at least advocate for the deployment of the high capacity transit system by 2035. The second goal would be to suggest that we supplement that high capacity transit route with autonomous vehicle demand response services when and if those become available. And then the third policy is simply to electrify all the transit vehicles used in the city. And then finally, to ensure that we have, again, some of that intermodal connectivity between bicycles and transit. Again, these policies are focused on trying to, policy and goal is focused on trying to make the public transit system work more effectively to allow residents of Ashland to make the choice not to drive. Hopefully to not own a car at all, which is, as the text reported, is quite rare. Any questions or comments on this one?
Just a general comment. I like the way you're going from goals to these policies. It's a nice template, I think, that we can use across the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the important takeaway, I think, is having the goals be measurable. That is, so that we can gauge our progress over time. And then for the policies to be actionable. If we contemplate the adoption of these policies and their use in city government or land use actions, then we can better manage the transition between where we are now and a more sustainable and resilient transportation and land use system going forward. Yeah. Next slide.
Yeah, just Gary, just going back to Jeff's question about golf carts. While you were talking, I was just Googling it. 24 states have passed laws allowing golf carts to be operated on, allowing towns, cities to make golf carts driving on their roads legal. One of the issues is the speed limit. But 20 is plenty. Would be fully consistent with a golf cart operated on city streets, because once you get above 25 miles an hour, then it's more hazardous.
Oh, thank you. That's good insight. Next slide. Yeah. So this is, again, looking at how we can make it possible for people to be less reliant upon owning a motor vehicle. And those statistics are available, or at least I found them to be available in formulating the report. And again, if we want to create a more resilient and in some ways socially fair transportation system, we need a transportation system that meets the needs of people who don't own a car or can't afford one or choose not to use one. And so these are really around how do we build a transportation system that facilitates that outcome. So again, the goal is to reduce reliance upon motorized vehicles to make it practical and convenient to live in Ashland without owning a motor vehicle. What a nice thought, right? So policy one, construct or reconstruct the existing transportation network to ensure that non-motorized modes of travel are safe as driving a motor vehicle, and most importantly, serve the travel needs of all ages and abilities. That dramatically means that truly means rebuilding the transportation system, because at this point it is largely monomodal. We do have the bike lanes and the sidewalks, but that doesn't make a multimodal transportation system. The next policy is increase revenue for the improvement of the pedestrian and bicycle networks. And that in some ways, Ray, kind of follows back to your question about the revenue source. And the implementation strategies, I identified implementing a gas tax within the city that would be dedicated exclusively to the improvement of bicycle and pedestrian networks. So again, that's why the focus is narrow, is because of an implementation strategy that kind of feeds into this one. Policy three, provide incentives in the form of parking regulation and supply to electrify the personal automobile fleet. And again, what I'm suggesting in the implementation strategies is that we basically provide off-street parking and potentially on-street parking only for electric vehicles. I don't quite know where the internal combustion engine powered vehicles would park, but that's why we don't want them there. We really don't want them. We ultimately want to be able to convey those vehicles aren't appropriate. They just aren't. So by providing parking only for electric vehicles, we begin to communicate the fact that those are outliers, that in fact, over time, you want to be able to get rid of your ICE and do what's right. And then finally, the fourth policy under this goal is to reduce motorized vehicle miles of travel per capita through improvements to the transportation system that incentivizes residents and visitors to choose to walk, bicycle, or use public transit. And this is, again, more of a measurement tool, but ultimately we want to see people switching modes. Any questions on this one or comments?
I can't see everybody, so if somebody has their hand up, please just go ahead.
In that case, let's move on to the fourth goal. This one is probably, of the goals, the most fundamental to seeing a transformation of the transportation system from a monomodal transportation system to a multimodal one. So the goal is to increase the share of vehicle miles of travel per capita of people riding bicycles, walking, or using other microforms of non-motorized transportation. At the present time, roughly about 90% of all vehicle miles of travel are taken by automobile, roughly about 1% by transit, 2% by bikes, and probably about 7% by pedestrians. We really want to, over time, change that dramatically. So the policies are, again, actionable items that will help to achieve that goal. And probably this first one is the most important because it basically says, let's shift investments away from motorized transportation and focus on the improvement, safety, and convenience and quality of bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. Ostensibly, we would quit building more roads for motor vehicles and put those investments into improving the bicycle and pedestrian system so that that becomes safe, reliable, and convenient. Policy 2 is basically to look at our bicycle and pedestrian networks to minimize out of direction travel. Simple enough. The fourth policy focuses on what metric we'll use to determine what bicycle facility is appropriate under what traffic volume and speeds on the highway system are. It's just a good, reliable source of data mostly. And then fourth, extend the existing non-motorized multi-use trails such as Bear Creek and the Central Bike Path to their logical terminus at the city limits, as well as to build and design other connectors that are multi-use paths throughout the city, mostly again focused on some of the drainage ways. Are there questions on or comments on this one? Next slide. Thank you again, Elizabeth. So I think in retrospect, what we're trying to do here is meet what Adam Hanks articulated in a little response that he had to a question posed in this preview, which is really reducing the number of vehicles in use in the city. We're going to provide a real option, a real viable, safe transportation system for all modes, which currently we don't have. So with that, what I thought the next step might logically be, and again, I'm suggesting this simply as a next step because it might help, is to ask the individual members of the CCOC and the Transportation Commission to review this document and then forward back their comments to the CPC as a way to begin that outreach and involvement process that we know we would need to go through in order to see these kinds of goals and policies ultimately adopted by the council, which has to happen if it's going to have any effect. The wishes and desires and preferences of the CPC only get implemented if they can get to the council and be approved. So reaching out to the Transportation Commission and the CCOC is a way of beginning that dialogue with the community. I think that's the last slide, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Commissioner Millett.
Yeah, Gary, I think your recommendation to have the other commissions look at it would be good. I don't know how much of this is already baked into our transportation plan. I assume some of it is. Really?
You know, if you look at in the white paper, in the background paper, I included a summary of the capital improvement program, and there's roughly about $40 million, of which, as I recall, less than $1 million is going towards bicycle improvements. So that, I think, serves to illustrate that while the transportation plan may be well written in terms of embracing alternative modes, the actualization or implementation of that plan to make alternative modes viable and safe just hasn't materialized.
Well, I think part of that's going to be the funding mechanism for this.
Councilor Graham?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we all are aware that the Transportation Commission is undergoing with staff an update to the transportation system plan. And so I think the timing of this and the extent to which goals in the SEEP can integrate with master planning processes, I think is really important. So I think now is a great time to have that conversation. And I also think that this process of reaching out to other commissions that are doing work on the same system as we go through these SEEP updates is a really important part of normal, sort of socializing the ideas, getting appropriate feedback and engagement, and really kind of starting that process of as we look to what this implementation plan needs to look like for the update for SEEP. But I think this is a good opportunity to see these elements if it's showing up in both the SEEP and then in the master plan, in the transportation system plan. So I think that what you've laid out here is a really good process, and I think we can make some good progress with it.
Thank you. I would just one minute. I think it is also important to note is that the housing needs analysis included many of the same implementation strategies that are contained within this paper, which again serves to illustrate the potential of public policy to influence and to create a more land use efficient network. But it's up to the Planning Commission in some ways, or the CPC or the City Council, someone to move those policies forward so that they are actually implemented. Simply throwing out great ideas isn't going to work. We're too stuck in the status quo. So Tanya, when you consider the housing needs analysis work and the implementation strategies that they articulated in that document, you might flag those that also are showing up in this paper as ones that you actually want to see the Planning Commission consider and bring back to you at some future date. Just again, so that we actually move forward with those good ideas that help us to reduce our impacts on the environment.
And I should just also add into, I think that that's a really good idea. And also there's discussion around the council process for approving the capital improvements program, the 20-year investment program, and timing it in a way that gives the council more time to kind of to dig into it, in its next iteration. And so I think that there are a number of these levers that I think are being pulled to kind of integrate these topics that are showing up in multiple places and figure out how do we make sure then that the investments that we make at the city are moving those elements, really forward. And so I see a lot of the pieces coming together and having it pointed out in the way that it is here. And I think that other elements of the SEEP update will be an important part of really integrating climate into those bigger policy and funding decisions.
Bob, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I was just going to say two things. One, just really the same thing that Tanya said about the transportation master plan, the Transportation Commission. I think working with them on this, getting their buy-in on this, getting this view, this approach integrated into the Transportation Master Plan is the right way to go. I don't know that a short deadline for response, you had suggested, I think, an April 26th deadline for getting back. I'm not sure that that's really, that may not be very feasible, given meeting times and giving times for, really getting engagement. I think it's better to get good engagement, and we've had some really good collaboration with the Transportation Commission through the 20 is Plenty and other things. So I think actually working hand in hand with them on this would be the right approach. The other thing that I wanted to say has to do with something that you didn't have in your presentation, but I would suggest in any subsequent presentations you make in any form is the point of affordability. You had a very nice statement in your paper where you talked about the second largest expenditure of a household is transportation. So when we talk about affordability, people talk about affordability in a very narrow way, often here in Ashland and elsewhere, having to do with housing price, the price of purchasing a house or renting a home. Well, there's also utilities, there's also transportation, there's a whole bunch of other things that have to do, that go into affordability. So making that point clearly and so in a supported way, that this is a contributor to affordability and also to diversifying the population of Ashland to allow people that don't have vehicles to live here. So I think you did a really nice job with this. Thank you very much for the paper that you prepared, and also you put us all to shame by doing a nice PowerPoint presentation that they laid it out, put it all on a silver platter for us.
So one response, Bob, to the time frame, I'm totally flexible on that. If the commission would prefer to extend that, I'm fine with it. What I was hoping to do was solicit comments from each individual member of those commissions rather than having them act as a group. It seems to me to ask them to consider it as a commission, the Transportation Commission or the CCOC, really places a huge burden on the commission that they may not be prepared to address given the complexity and scope. My thought was that if we can ask the individual members to kind of give us their ideas, then it makes it a much less of a lift and potentially something that they can get back to us as individuals within that time frame. But again, I'm certainly flexible on what the time frame is. We aren't going to move forward with a SEEP update or a SEEP implementation plan, probably for the next 6 months. Anybody got a better guess? So having a longer time frame for them to consider it's fine with me.
Go ahead, Commissioner Wyatt.
Sorry to get back down in the weeds a little bit, but last summer and fall, part of the plaza was turned over to outdoor dining, and it seemed like an awful lot of people I know were very pleased with that. So is anyone giving any thought to doing what a lot of European cities do and creating kind of a pedestrian only zone, even if it's just limited to the plaza, to encourage people to get out of their cars and walk, and also maybe benefit the business community downtown?
The huge lift that I think the city faces here is that many members of the business community look at parking as their cash cow. And so any effort to reduce or eliminate parking is an affront to their potential profitability. And I think in certain instances, drive-by traffic is in fact essential to the success of the business. I'm not so certain, though, that that's necessarily the mix of businesses over the long term that need to be in and around the plaza. So I think this concept, as shown in one of the Appendix B, I think would be very popular, except for among those people in the business community that, again, look at dollars and cents and the free parking as an asset that they believe is under, in some parts, their control, which it is public space. Bob?
Yeah, just following in on that, you made it. I think you had actually included it as an appendix, as you just said in your document as well. That diagram that you also included to the downtown revitalization effort or something. I think that's a nice thing to put in, a nice thing to pursue. And I think there's, as you said, there's people who are in favor and people who are against it. I wanted to go back to your other point though about consulting with members of the other commissions as individuals versus as commissions. I would of course defer to the chair of each of those commissions, I suppose, of how they want to, how they can manage their agenda. But I'm a little bit allergic to the idea of soliciting individual members as individual input as individuals versus taking advantage of, there's a city structure that involves commissions. It just feels like the public process is better served by doing that through the commissions. Again, I defer to the respective chairs. The advantages of doing it that way as well is you've got an additional council member that is the liaison in the Transportation Commission. We've got the same one on the CCOC, of course. But it just seems to me, my gut reaction is that in terms of process, it's better to go through the full commission. And I think success, you all know my views about writing a new plan, an update or an implementation plan or whatever, you're writing all these things. I'd much rather the transportation master plan, incorporate all this stuff than have another round of writing of a seat that includes, however much it is, because I think it really has a much better chance of getting implemented in the transportation master plan than it is a freestanding document that has a transportation piece. But that's my.
It will be fascinating to see how we move forward as institutions working with this, because we have every legitimate right to advance our policies as we see necessary to achieve the objectives of our commission, as does the Transportation Commission. So while I have every confidence that we'll find common ground with the Transportation Commission, especially given that the chair of the commission has consistently said that she hopes to integrate the SEEP in the Transportation System Plan update in its entirety, or reflect those kinds of objectives. So I'm confident we'll see assimilation of these different ideas as we move forward. But again, I wouldn't suggest that we delegate the responsibility for the Transportation Commission in its entirety to that commission, because we've got a vested interest too. We've got a responsibility, if you will.
So just to be clear, I was not suggesting delegating anything. Okay. I was suggesting facilitating integration of climate smart policies into every single plan like we're trying to do, and just working through the regular city process for doing that. Right. So,
coming back, Bob, and I think your comment about soliciting the commission level feedback is probably the appropriate way to go, knowing that it will be a challenging task for them to do as a commission. But I think that, as you point out, is really their role. So, whether it's 2 months or 3 months that we provide for that review, I think that, as you're suggesting, Bob, is probably the more appropriate way to do it, rather than asking the individual members to sign off or give feedback. So I would change my recommendation to the CPC to reflect that approach rather than what I had written earlier.
Councillor Graham, did you have something that you wanted to add?
She's gone dark.
No, not at this point. Thank you. It's been handled by Bob's comments.
Okay, terrific. Let me find our agenda again. Sorry. So I'm sorry, Commissioner Chef, did you want us to, do you need a motion in relation?
I think he wants a motion. I think he wants a motion.
Yeah, I think motion, please, to
sure,
to authorize distribution of this paper with some minor edits, by the way, to the Transportation Commission and the CCOC, asking that they give us the respective commission's feedback within 90 days, 3 months time, something like that. Does that sound reasonable?
Yep. Can I just say so moved? All right. Any
Somebody
second? Second.
Okay. Anybody opposed? Okay, terrific. Motion passes.
Thank you very much. So this next item, the next item on the agenda I also have, and it relates to a bill before the legislature that would create a new land use goal. And given that last meeting we reviewed the land use primer, and given that I distributed the announcement of this goal to you early last month following our meeting, I think you probably have adequate background on it to know whether we should be asking the City Council to endorse this bill. That is my recommendation, is that we solicit the, or ask the City Council to convey to the Southern Oregon delegation the city's endorsement of this bill.
So I move to request City Council submit formal endorsement of HB 2488 to the Oregon Legislature.
Southern Oregon, right.
Ray?
Can we have some discussion?
I think Tanya was asking to
oh,
talk
pardon
as
me,
well.
Tanya, excuse me, go ahead.
So I've been in conversations with Representative Marsh about this, and it appears that that bill, which was climate and equity together, looks like it is going to be just equity this year, and that the climate piece is being separated out. So that I just heard that a couple of days ago. So I just wanted to make sure that we have that for our deliberation.
Yeah, that was my comment too. The way I read the bill, it's not clear that it addresses climate overall and climate justice. It looked like it focused more on just climate justice. But either way, so then I don't know what that would mean in terms of a land use plan, Gary, if it doesn't include overall climate.
You know, given the fact that the Land Conservation and Development Commission would be tasked with developing some new goal, presumably that hasn't been stripped out. Land use goals by their very nature relate to comprehensive land use plans. And so there will be, I would guess, a substantial piece of land use in that outcome that will relate to something more than simply an assessment of fairness and equity. But it's impossible to know how the Land Conservation and Development Commission will write the new goal and what its contents will be. I think the most we can hope for is that it passes and that we get an opportunity to provide input and suggestions on what the scope and content would be of that new goal.
So should we defer support for the, pardon me, Commissioner Wyatt, go ahead, please.
Well, that's precisely my question. Since it's a moving target and things appear to be changing, can we postpone this till the next meeting when we have better information?
That's a strategic question. And, the legislature from this far away looks pretty amorphous. And I really, the bills get rehashed and reincorporated and changed all the time. How we respond given that fact is anybody's guess. I really don't have a recommendation.
So could we, instead of expressing support for a bill in its entirety, could we express support for certain provisions in the bill that are important to us?
Well, it seems that we're actually asking the Ashland City Council to do this on our behalf. And so it seems like it's, it has the potential to get sliced and diced into something that has a very little meaning, I suppose. So I don't know. I guess I would withdraw my motion, but based on this new information, but I don't know about going forward with it.
My sense is that it's a move to recommend this, as Julian just pointed out, that the City Council request the Southern Oregon legislative delegation support this. One of the sponsors is one of the members of the Southern Oregon legislative delegation. It doesn't seem to me like it's the critical thing for the City Council to do in order to get the Southern Oregon legislative delegation to support this. Maybe since it's not critical, and since we don't, because it is a moving target and all those things, maybe it's better to defer it. And if we find that we need it sometime in the future, we can do it. But it's likely to pass or not pass, regardless of what the Ashland City Council decides or doesn't decide to do.
Part of our role, as I view it, is helping to ensure that the council is well informed and understands the issues that are important to us in a way. And for me, at least, this is a crucial outcome that really should happen independent of what the legislature might choose to focus on. We really need this kind of legislative authority to move forward with many of the things that we think, at least at this point, that we need to do. So again, I really don't know. I guess Tanya probably has the best handle on whether it warrants moving forward or just putting it aside until we know more, or maybe putting it aside permanently.
Well, one of the things that I think is difficult is that, and they staff has explained this to me, is that when you have a particular bill, because it is a moving target, if we put this forward, staff is likely to look at the bill and see if it makes sense from a staffing standpoint. And depending on how it's developing, the staff might have some concerns about it that it would then, present to the council. So it's not necessarily a slam dunk, especially with it so, still such a moving target. If what the commission wants to do, though, is to express support for the concept of specifically calling out climate in the state's land use planning system, that we support climate being its own element or something along those lines. I think that creates a little bit more general support that then our legislative delegation can do what they need to with it, and it wouldn't give the city so much heartburn because of not knowing what exactly it's going to look like. But I would also suggest that both of our delegation that serves Ashland is very much in favor of climate. So to Bob's point, I don't know how necessary it is to remind them that we want them to keep working on climate in this particular construct.
We have 2 minutes left.
Oh, I'll bring this back next time if it warrants it.
Okay. So I'm going to end discussion of that topic. So topic tracking, I don't know that Elizabeth, are you in charge of topic tracking, or who is in charge of topic tracking?
Generally Rick, but I think he usually just asks you all to review it and get back to him if anything seems out of place.
Okay. And then Elizabeth, are you able to tell us the next meeting that we have planned?
That should be, let's see, on May 13th?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
4 to 6:30.
4 to 6:30. Terrific. One other, so this is something that I should have brought up at the beginning of the meeting, but and so I'm sorry to be bringing it up very late in the very last moment, but the Ashland Parks and Recreation Commission is going through its goal setting process at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the goals being considered is an inventory of all of our greenhouse gas emitting items with a plan to replace, or a categorization of priorities, and then a plan to replace them with sort of a fee schedule attached to it. And the goal setting will continue. And one of the next high priority points in that process is our next meeting, which is Wednesday evening. As a separate thing in the very last moment, as you're well aware, Ashland Parks and Recreation takes comments on goals and other things from the public. And so anybody that might be interested in our goals could certainly submit their comments or feelings about the various different goals. That's all that I have. Anybody have any last thoughts for our meeting? And otherwise I'll adjourn our meeting.
Thank you, Julian.
All right. Thanks very much for everybody.
Okay, right.